Minister Graham, thank you very much indeed for your tour d'horizon about Norway's perspective on Europe, the High North, global security, and the comprehensive approach in NATO. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our great pleasure now to welcome the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg. Mr. Stoltenberg holds a postgraduate degree in economics from the University of Oslo. After graduating in 1987, he held a research post at the National Statistical Institute of Norway before embarking on a career in Norway. And just a small CV on that, on the impressive career, 1991 to 2014, Member of Parliament, 2002 to 2014, he was leader of the Norwegian Labour Party, 1990 to 1991, he was State Secretary at the Ministry of the Environment, 1993 to 96, Minister of Industry and Energy, Minister of Finance, Prime Minister of Norway from 2000 to 2001 and from 2005 to 2013. Jens Stoltenberg became NATO Secretary General in October 2014 and has been extended until September 2023. You, sir, have led the alliance and are still leading it through quite stormy weather and political times. You have the word, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Wolski. Reinhard, it's good to see you again. And ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to be back in Germany. And thank you so much for inviting me to the Berlin Security Conference. I'm also delighted, of course, that Norway is supporting this year's Berlin Security Conference. Germany is a key NATO ally that makes significant contributions to our alliance. Your leadership is more important than ever as we face the most serious security situation in decades. And we need to stand together and act together in the face of these extremely challenging security challenges. President Putin's war of aggression has shattered peace in Europe with long-lasting shockwaves for global security. I'm coming from our foreign ministerial meeting in Bucharest, where we discussed earlier this week how we could ensure that we continue to provide support to Ukraine. And it was a clear and strong message from all allies that we will sustain our support and continue to bolstering our defenses in a more dangerous and competitive world. Thanks to the heroic resistance of the Ukrainian people and the unprecedented support from NATO allies, Ukraine has made significant gains. But we should not underestimate Russia. Russian missiles and drones continue to rain down on Ukrainian cities, civilians and critical infrastructure, causing enormous human suffering as winter sets in. I welcome Germany's strong support for Ukraine, with significant financial, humanitarian and military aid, including advanced air defense systems and training for Ukrainian soldiers. We see the difference this makes every day on the battlefield. And it is important to further step up and sustain our support. Yes, our support comes with a price. These are tough times for many around the world, including here in Germany, with rising costs of living, food and energy prices. But the price we pay is in money, while the price the Ukrainians pay is in blood. If authoritarian regimes see that force is rewarded, we will all pay a much higher price, and the world will become a more dangerous world for all of us. There can be no lasting peace if the aggressor wins, if oppression and autocracy prevail over freedom and democracy. So the best way to support lasting peace is to support Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine did not come as a surprise. Months before the attack, NATO shared intelligence showing that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine. And despite all our efforts to find a diplomatic solution, Putin went ahead with his plans. NATO was well prepared. Within hours after the invasion, we activated our defense plans and deployed thousands of troops to the eastern part of the alliance, supported by substantial air and naval capabilities, to send a clear message to Moscow and prevent escalation of the war beyond Ukraine. Germany's decision to substantially increase defense spending is historic. With investments in new fighter jets, helicopters, ships and submarines. This is truly a Zeitenwende, a turning point that reflects our changed security environment. Germany plays a critical role in the strengthening of our deterrence and defense, leading our battle group in Lithuania, assigning a combat brigade to reinforce if needed, providing more jets for our air policing, and strengthening our air defenses. All these efforts need to be stepped up and sustained. We need strong and a ready Bundeswehr with high-end capabilities across all domains. We need a strong and robust defense industry that can deliver on the requirements based on clear and sustainable demand signals. This matters for Germany's security, it matters for Europe's security, and it matters for global security. The war in Ukraine has also demonstrated our dangerous dependency on Russian gas. This should lead us to assess our dependencies on other authoritarian states, not least China, for our supply chains, technology, and infrastructure. We will, of course, continue to trade and engage economically with China. But we have to be aware of our dependencies, reduce our vulnerabilities, and manage the risks. So, ladies and gentlemen, as Europe's largest economy and a responsible global actor, I count on Germany, as I count on all allies, to stay the course in Ukraine, to further strengthen our collective defense, and to bolster the resilience of our societies. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Secretary General, for sharing your oversight and means and ways ahead for NATO and us. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary General Stoltenberg was so kind to give us some minutes for questions and answers. There's microphones in the hallways, and so most for us, this is a rare chance to ask. Microphones are being brought to you. I would kindly ask to introduce yourself with name and profession, activity, and to ask one question. Please, the floor is open. Okay, go ahead. Over
Hello, I'm Nicholas Khatiashvili, representing Parliament of Georgia. First of all, thank you for your introductory speech, and thank you for your support towards Georgia. Actually, I have two questions. The first question is, do you think that it was a mistake not to grant Georgia MAP in 2008? And my another question is, how do you see the role of Georgia in Black Sea security in a short-term term period? Thank you.
Microphone, please.
I think this works.
Yeah.
First of all, Georgia is a highly valued partner for NATO, and we are actually stepping up our cooperation with Georgia. That was a clear message from the summit of NATO leaders in Madrid in June, and it was reiterated at the foreign ministerial meeting I just come from in Bucharest earlier this week, where also the Georgian foreign minister participated. And it was a clear message that we need to do more together with Georgia. We have strengthened our political cooperation, our practical support, and also realizing, of course, or that is reflecting the fact that the whole Black Sea region is of great strategic importance for the alliance. NATO in general has increased its presence in the Black Sea region, both, of course, because we have three littoral states, Turkey, Bulgaria and Romania as members, but also, of course, because both Ukraine and Georgia are close and valued partners. We will continue to step up, and not least in face of the aggressive policies of Russia, we see the importance of working with partners like Georgia.
Thank you. Next question is at the 8th row, then General Dr. Olshausen, and then the 5th row. So please.
Thank you very much for your comments, Secretary General. My name is Robert von Keudel, company Kubota. I would like to ask you, what are your views on strengthening the resilience also in our societies, in our Western societies, to keep up the activities of NATO in this brutal war?
Well, it works? Yeah. The resilience is a very important part of our security. We cannot have strong defenses without having strong societies. Therefore, resilience has been on the top of the NATO agenda for a long time, but of course, in the security environment where we face more hybrid threats, where we also see the vulnerabilities and the challenges in cyberspace, resilience has become even more important. So therefore, in NATO, we have developed resilience guidelines. We have focused on how to protect critical infrastructure, and in that, as Minister Gram just mentioned, also the challenges faced related to undersea infrastructure, pipelines, cables. So we need to focus on resilience. This is also linked to how we engage economically with authoritarian powers. Free trade has served us all well. I still believe that we benefit from free trade, but we need to realize that when we engage economically with authoritarian powers like Russia on gas, or like with China on some critical commodities, rare earth minerals, for instance, it has consequences for our securities. So these decisions cannot only be made based on commercial considerations. You have to take into account the security consequences of, for instance, being dependent on Russian gas or over-dependent on some specific commodities from China. So resilience is about many aspects, including trade and economy.
Thank you very much. Then Lieutenant General retired. Dr. Olshausen.
Retired. You spoke about the rain of rockets and missiles and on strengthening the air defense. Wouldn't we need to look at hitting not only the flying missiles, but hit the launching places from where they come?
NATO is not party to the conflict in Ukraine. We have no troops and we have no presence in the air of Ukraine. What NATO does is that we support Ukraine in its right for self-defense, a right which is enshrined in the UN Charter. And then we provide support to Ukraine with weapons that help them to defend themselves. And that includes, of course, also air defense systems, artillery, HIMARS, and also a lot of advanced weapon systems. And I would like to praise and commend Germany for being one of the allies that is providing the most when it comes to different types of weapons, ammunition, military support to Ukraine. And we have seen that this has made a huge difference on the ground by being able to push back the Russian troops, the invading forces, first in the north around Kiev, then in the east around Kharkiv, and then in the south around Kherson. It's not for us to decide. What matters is that we enable the Ukrainians to defend themselves, and the message from NATO allies is that we will sustain, step up, and ensure that Ukraine gets weapons, ammunition, and that we are ready to support them for as long as it takes.
I think the gentleman here, then Bob Walter, then the gentleman there, and then two gentlemen in the 5th and 6th rows.
Klaus Wittmann, former Brigadier General. I teach contemporary history at Potsdam University, and this semester, recent history of Ukraine. Sir, apart from air defense and artillery, it is clear that Ukraine also needs armored combat vehicles. And since the German government does not want to go it alone, keine Alleingänge, the European Council on Foreign Relations has made the proposals that 13 European Leopard nations get together and act as a kind of consortium and deliver armored vehicles together. What do you think about that proposal?
So, NATO allies and partners have delivered armored vehicles, and allies just at the meeting we had this week. I think it was Slovakia that announced that they were going to deliver more armored vehicles. And we have also delivered a lot of advanced weapon systems, and we see that this is making a huge difference on the battlefield every day. I will not go into the exact specifics of the types of weapons we are considering, but allies are constantly considering different types of weapons. We are also in close dialogue with Ukraine. We had Minister Kuleba at the meeting in Bucharest. We meet in this, what we call the Ramstein format, led by the United States. And all in all, I think that what we have seen is an unprecedented level of military support. President Putin made two big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. The first big strategic mistake was to underestimate Ukraine. The courage, the commitment, the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian political leadership. The other big strategic mistake he made was to underestimate NATO allies and partners in our unity and our resolve to provide support to Ukraine. So yes, I absolutely understand the need to discuss and to address the specific systems, but we have provided already a lot of advanced systems, including armored vehicles. And thirdly, one more point on this, is that it is important to discuss what kind of additional systems we should provide, and there's a constant discussion and dialogue with Ukraine on that. But I think as important as delivering new systems, it is extremely important to make sure that the systems we already deliver function. Because we have actually delivered a lot of systems. And they need, as you know, they need ammunition. They need spare parts. They need maintenance. So one of the huge challenges is to ensure that all the systems which are already in place are actually functioning as they should. That's a huge logistical challenge. I'm not saying not new systems doesn't matter, but I'm saying to ensure that all the systems which are in place function is extremely important, and we are focusing on that too.
Okay, First Bob Walter, then the gentleman here, then the two gentlemen 5, 6, and Dr. Atzpodin with the last question, I guess, because we have to close this session. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Please make it short.
Okay, Secretary General, thank you for your address. Robert Walter, I am from the European Security and Defence Association and also President of Eurodefense United Kingdom. We have seen the Ukraine crisis create unprecedented cooperation between NATO and the European Union because there is a common threat assessment in both organizations. And I think, and I would like your comments on this, that this is an opportunity. You are originally from Norway, I am from the United Kingdom, for the European nations in NATO to build a stronger European pillar using the resources of the member states of both the European Union and of NATO and the EU institutions themselves, and put us beyond criticism if by chance there should be a change of administration in the United States in 2 years' time.
So first of all, I strongly welcome stronger NATO-EU cooperation, and over the last years we have been able to lift NATO-EU cooperation up to unprecedented levels on a wide range of issues from cyber, maritime, resilience, and in many other areas. We work together in the Balkans. You have the NATO presence in Kosovo. You have the support in the EU diplomatic efforts. And also, as you alluded to, of course, the way we work together in providing support to Ukraine demonstrates how strong and how important the NATO-EU cooperation is. And this is something I have personally also strongly worked for all of my years as Secretary General. So that's obvious. Then I also welcome more EU efforts on defense, as long as that doesn't duplicate NATO efforts, because we need to realize that NATO remains the bedrock for European and transatlantic security. As long as European efforts on defense means things like, for instance, increased defense spending, any meaningful increased European efforts on defense has to come with increased defense spending. There is one organization that has been calling for increased European defense spending for decades, and that is NATO. So of course we welcome that Germany and other European allies spend more on defense. Good. If it means that European allies are providing more capabilities, more battle tanks, more ammunition, more readiness forces, also great. It's absolutely in line with what NATO has been asking for many years, and we see that allies are spending more, European allies are spending more, and they're also providing new capabilities. We strongly welcome that. And also, if European defense means that, for instance, you're addressing the fragmentation of the European defense industry, it's a great advantage for all of us. As we all know, the United States, they have very many battle tanks, one main type. In Europe, we have quite few battle tanks and 7 different types. So, of course, the cost per unit, there is no economy of scale, maintenance, spare parts, all education, all of that becomes extremely difficult when we have this fragmentation. So all of these are extremely good initiatives when it comes to European defense efforts. What we must prevent is duplication and competition. So, for instance, to have another intervention force, so we have an intervention force, and that is the NATO response force. And every time Europe needs that force, we are there. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Kosovo, you have to remember that the Libya operation, that was not a NATO operation originally, it was a European initiative, and after some time they came to NATO and asked us for help, and then we supported the Libya operation. So I'm only saying that we have an intervention force, we have a command structure, and we should do a NATO command structure, NATO readiness force. So we should do nothing that is duplicating and competing with that. And then more fundamentally, we need to realize that
that 80% of NATO's defense spending is coming from non-EU allies. So of course we welcome the efforts of the EU members, and I call on them to do more every day. But it represents 20%. And then one more thing on this is that yes, of course, there may be elections in both Europe and in North America where you elect people who are not, as I say, enthusiastically in favor of NATO. That has happened before, it may happen again. But if you are concerned about that, you should not do anything which is weakening the institutionalized bond between Europe and North America. If you reduce the transatlantic idea to kind of bilateral personal relationship, then we are vulnerable. But if we have strong institutions, and that institution is NATO, because that's the only truly transatlantic institution, then we can weather storms. The reality is that, yes, we had President Trump, and there were, what should I say, questions asked. But NATO survived. We actually strengthened the presence of NATO troops in Europe over those years. So, any indication that Europe can go alone can just weaken the transatlantic bond. So I strongly believe in NATO. I strongly believe in Europe and North America working together. I don't believe in Europe alone, as I don't believe in America alone. I believe in Europe and North America together in NATO, and we need to safeguard that. Thank you.
Congratulations, sir, for your speech. I'm Colonel Liasites, from Defense Attaché from Republic of Cyprus. And from my country, we strongly support this cooperation with Europe for Ukraine. My question is, as we have occupation from an alien, NATO alien, Turkey, that is a candidate country in Europe, 48 years now. Do you think that it's time to support Cyprus' problem for the reunification of Cyprus after 48 years? Thank you.
So we strongly support the UN efforts to try to find a negotiated and peaceful solution. I think that's the only way to address the challenges and the unsolved issues in Cyprus, and that's also why we welcome those efforts. There have been different initiatives, and I think that remains the only way to solve the challenges and the conflict in Cyprus.
The gentleman, I think row 5 and 6 was, yeah, please. Dr. Atwood, there's one, and then you close the session. Okay.
Thank you, sir, very much for a very good speech. Sverre Engenes from Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace. I've spent about 40 years in the Norwegian Armed Forces. And it's understandable that we're now focusing on the current and the short-term issues. But what are your thoughts for a new security architecture in Europe, considering that maybe over-dramatized a little bit, but the one we have is actually in shambles, where the CFE and a lot of the other treaties basically have been pushed aside, and as some have commented on both today and yesterday, we don't necessarily cooperate the way we used to, and what is then the future for us? Thank you.
One important element, part of a European security architecture is NATO. And if anything, the war in Ukraine has just highlighted, demonstrated the importance of maintaining NATO as a pillar of European security. With North America, with Canada, with the United States, we see all the support they provide to Ukraine. We see that that NATO has been able to significantly increase its military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. to prevent escalation of the war. So I'm fully aware of that. NATO is not the whole European security architecture, because you have institutions as OSCE and so on, but an extremely important part of any meaningful European security architecture is NATO. And NATO is more vital, stronger, more agile than it's been for decades, because the war didn't start in February this year. The war started in 2014. That was when Russia annexed Crimea and actually started to control parts of eastern Donbass. Since then, NATO has we have implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense, the biggest adaptation of our alliance since the end of the Cold War, with battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance, with increased defense spending, with high readiness, and more U.S. and North American presence. We have a U.S.-led battle group in Poland. We have a Canadian-led battle group in Latvia. So you have more North America in Europe now than I had for many, many years. I say this because sometimes you speak about European security architecture, something abstract and something also, for academics. So it's very good. But it's very much about NATO. And NATO is there more than we have seen for many decades. Then, of course, there are also other elements, and that includes not least Russia, how to relate to Russia. And that has been shattered by the war in Ukraine. For many years, NATO strived for a more constructive relationship with Russia, for dialogue with Russia. I was Prime Minister when President Putin and Medvedev attended NATO summits. I just came from Bucharest, as I told you, when I was there at the summit in 2008. President Putin was there. In Lisbon, Medvedev attended. That world doesn't exist anymore. Because with the invasion of Ukraine, that whole idea of a meaningful dialogue with Russia is shattered. Also, it has been smashed, destroyed by Russia. At the same time, we need to maintain military lines of communications to prevent escalation, to prevent incidents. We saw the incident in Poland. We need to do whatever we can to have accidents that can spiral out of control. So we need military lines of communication. I see General Breedlove is here in the audience. He was active speaking to his Russian counterparts when he was SACEUR, or the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. We need to have that lines of communications. And of course, we also need to continue to engage with Russia on issues like arms control. So the one part, NATO, is as strong as ever. The other part of the European security architecture, this cooperation with Russia, is not functioning. Russia has walked away from the meaningful dialogue, but we need a minimum of contact, military lines of communications, and, for instance, to address issues like arms control.
So there was, okay. So closing question by Dr. Atzpodin, please.
Hans Atzpodin, I'm representing the Federation of German Defense Industry and Security Industry. Secretary General, the question I have is regarding the Green Deal of the EU. The Green Deal has turned out to be a very powerful transformation agent for our societies, and it means that on the one hand, ministries have to become climate neutral, companies like our member companies have to become have to get ESG conformity, which we are really doing. However, we are producing weapons, and our financial sector categorizes weapons, even if they are, in order to help our armed forces to fulfill their NATO task, tend to categorize those weapons as non-sustainable. What can NATO do in order to bridge this kind of gap?
So you are raising a very important issue, and that is that I have also the defense industry, represented by you and others. They have raised with me several times. We had a big conference in Rome some time ago. I had meetings with a lot of defense executives, actually in Brussels just a couple of weeks ago, and they raised exactly the same issue, that they have problems with getting financing
investments because they don't fulfill these ASG guidelines, and there have also been some questions about the EU taxonomy. We have engaged with the European Union on those issues, raised our concerns. The European Union is now looking into it, working on it, and some actions have been taken to make it easier for the defense industry to get finance. This is partly about government regulations, but it's also very much about what private financial companies decide themselves without any government regulations. So I think this is partly to address governments. We are doing that as an alliance, and the European Union. They are very much aware, and they're working on the issue to try to avoid that kind of, as I say, unintended effects. And we need also to then address the financial sector, because it is absolutely there's no meaning in saying that we should make it harder, more difficult to invest in the defense industry. We need those capabilities. Of course, it's always nicer to invest in health and infrastructure and education. But when there is a full-fledged war going on in Ukraine, the way to save life is to give them ammunition, to give them air defense. And that's the brutal reality, like it or not. If you look at the opinion polls, people understand this. They don't regard the defense industry from NATO allied countries as something which is not sustainable. The reality is that the only way to sustain peace is to invest in defense. And rest assured, we are working hard on that. And of course, we have seen a transition where the defense industry was state-owned. Then many of them have been more private-owned. But of course, you cannot end up in a situation where the defense industry is not able to get private capital and then end all as state-owned again. Because the private financial market has some idea of what is sustainable. So they just have to change the idea of what is sustainable and make it easier to invest in the defense industry.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for your briefing and frank answers to the audience of the Berlin Security Conference, and we wish you good luck and Godspeed for the alliance driving forward and the cohesion of the alliance. Thank you very much indeed, sir.